right, I'll let folks in now. Righty, we want to welcome everybody. Looks like we've got everybody admitted, Dr. Hobbs. So if we want to get started, we can go ahead and do that.
All right. I think some of you have been through this process, like I know Leslie has, but it's just to give you a quick overview and then we'll do some introductions. We start by just giving you an overview on how to read the reports that you recently received. And then we give you the opportunity to go into one-to-one breakout rooms so you can just talk about your program. So that's kind of the approach we'll use today. I'll start with introductions. Yesterday I just introduced everybody, but today I'll let you guys, I'll just popcorn it to somebody after me. But I'm Dr. Ann Hobbs. I'm the director of the Juvenile Justice Institute, and I will pass it to Michaela.
Hi, I'm Michaela Benson Goldsmith. I was the research specialist with JJI, part of the process making these reports. I just recently moved to another position in the University of Nebraska, so still adjacent and obviously still partnering and communicating with JJI. I'll pass it to Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. Michelle Luters. I am the program specialist or program coordinator here for the Evidence-Based Nebraska project. So I work with Michaela and Dr. Hobbs on more of the um, management of what's going on here and helping with things of that nature. And with that, I will pass it on to Emily.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Rader. I've recently been brought on to help with some research and reporting. So I will pass it over to Faith.
Hi, I'm the graduate assistant for JJI. I'm just helping out on this project and helping all of the team.
Yeah, anytime somebody says just know they're doing a lot of the work. So, okay, I'm going to try to get my screen. There you go. So the process this year is we are looking at 3 years of data. And so there is an overlap a little bit from last year's reports. We're looking at like during that 3 year fiscal year, the 3 fiscal years that we're examining, July 1 through June 30th, 2023. You may have had a program funded one year, not funded. So you'll see that in some of the trend analysis. So keep that in mind. And our goal or under our contract with the Crime Commission, we receive the data, analyze it, and then produce brief reports one-to-one by program type. So this morning we're talking about assessments. That's intentional because we try to create communities of practice. So if one agency is like, hey, I had really good results, or I want to change something about my process, that you have kind of other people you can connect with. Under the statute and kind of under our contract, we are charged with trying to measure and trying to help programs become more effective. So that's really our why. That's what the work that we do. We don't want it to just sit on a shelf or sit in a report. We want you to take these reports that you get and digest them and find ways to improve your program. That really allows your vision to take action. So that's our why, but hopefully it's transmitting to some of your why. So your individual reports, really, they're designed to be useful for you and your agency and your staff. At the end, you'll have an opportunity to take a survey, and if they're not for some reason, we like to hear that too, because we want these to be something that you can either bring to a funder or bring to your staff meeting and talk about like how to enroll more youth. So whatever your report says, we want it to be that useful, like that practical. So sometimes agencies find that it shows them where they're not able to sufficiently reach youth, or in the recommendations that we make at the end, you may find very specific nuggets that you can dive in and make slight revisions to your program. So that's the intent. And like I said, you'll have an opportunity if you feel like we're we didn't give you enough information, or if you feel like they don't do that, please do let us know. So in order to do any kind of analysis at that individual program level, we need really good data, both on youth that are referred and then youth that, which assessment tool they use, and then where they go from there. So we have to have enough data in each case, but also sufficient cases. So in some programs, they only, work with 7 or 8 kids, and that's really too few cases to say something meaningful. So there's kind of 2 aspects to having sufficient data. Some of our measures are uniform across all the program types. So whether it's a diversion program, a truancy program, or an assessment or referral program, the statute specifically was drafted. So the community-based aid statute, the intent of it was really to front load services for youth so they don't end up system involved later. So a lot of times you'll hear us call it future system involvement. That's how we frame it in your reports, because it's also a way of, another word for it could be recidivism. But some of our kids and some of our programs haven't been system involved yet. So that's why we're looking ahead to future system involvement. Under the community-based aid fund, what we look at and what you'll see in your report is we look at, did that youth go on to commit a status offense? That would be something like truancy, or running away, a law offense, which is a law violation of some type. And then we look at both of those measures within 1 year of completion of or discharge from your program. For probation and detention, we look at whether that youth ever has contact with probation, so whether they're ever placed on probation and whether they ever have an intake to detention. So there's slightly different measures there, but we're really just looking down the road to see where do these kids end up and do they eventually touch the system. So I'm going to turn it over now to Michaela, and she'll give you some guidance on reading your report.
Absolutely, thank you. So for the first page of the reports, very similar to last year, it's just covering the demographics of your program. So the youth that were served during that 3 fiscal year time period. So at the top, you'll see the kind of breakdown of total referrals that were received, as well as then how many were enrolled, and broken down by the race ethnicity categories, so that you can kind of see whether there's any distribution differences for the rates of youth of different races or ethnicities that were enrolled versus not enrolled. Next, we would have age and gender, and then we have this new plot this year that's called a proportion plot, and it's comparing the county population to your program's population, counties on the left, program population on the right. And we did want this year to try to incorporate more representative comparison populations for the programs, including assessment programs, wanting to get more the youth that were coming into contact with law enforcement and comparing with that instead of the overall county. Unfortunately, we ran into issues of not being able to collect the race and ethnicity data that would be necessary for those comparisons with law violation or law enforcement contacts. So we were ultimately had to rely on just the county level data as well. Or again. So what this plot is showing is the county population if it's not a straight line across to the program population, that's going to indicate a difference in the distribution of race or ethnicity categories. So for this example, you can see that while the county, most of the youth are white, there's 71% of the youth are white. In this program, only about a third were white. And instead, a lot bigger proportion of the youth served were of another race or multiple races or were Black compared to the county population. All right. This is also getting back to the top of that page, that comparison of referrals and enrollment by race and ethnicity. And this graph can look a little different on some of the reports. So if you had all of your youth enrolled, you might not have this big breakdown as much, and instead it'll just focus on the distribution of race and ethnicity across the total referrals since there's no difference in enrollment. Okay. So the next page is getting to the trends over time. This is one of the big changes for this year compared to last year. Now that we have 3 years, we can start to look at trends. 3 years is still a pretty small period. So in terms of trends, take that with a grain of salt of it might have varied substantially in the following year. But we do want to see over those 3 years, the black line shows referrals, and then the blue boxes or filled in area is the number of enrollments. So we're wanting to see whether the rate of youth being enrolled compared to those referred changed at any particular times across the 3 years, or if it was relatively consistent. So in this program, most of the youth were enrolled across all 3 years, and there isn't a very obvious trend of time periods where more youth weren't being enrolled compared to others. We do describe in the narrative some more information, such as the peak referral month was July 2021, or in some of the programs, we focus on the total referrals for each fiscal year, of which fiscal year did you receive the most referrals versus maybe the least referrals. Okay. All right, on the same page, a similar graph, but this time we're breaking it down by race and ethnicity across those 3-year time periods. So the very bottom gray line is going to mimic that chart we just saw on your report. And that's the total youth referred across the 3 years. And then each higher level is going to be the separate race or ethnicity groups. And so what we're looking for here is if there's a change specific to a group. So if, as you can see, referrals increased substantially in the last fiscal year, but if we saw for one of the race or ethnicity groups that the referrals for that group didn't increase in that year, or they increased in a separate year, that would be something of interest to know of why did possibly referrals might have declined for white youth while the rest of them increased. And so looking into why that might be or not. It's not in our slides here, but one other table that you'll see on this page is the incomplete assessments. So this is just a descriptive table, no graph, but it's explaining for each of the 3 fiscal years how many youth enrolled or referred to the program did not actually have an assessment completed, and then the reasons why those referrals did not result in a completed assessment. All right. And now we get to the 3rd page, which is our outcomes page. So for the assessments, we wanted to list out, this isn't really an outcome, but looking at those processes of which assessment tools are commonly used during this time frame, and then looking at those assessment outcomes. So once they were assessed, what was the outcome of that assessment? And we were looking for successful was considered that no charge or warning letter, referred for other services, voluntary services, or juvenile diversion. And these were lumped together and successful as considered that the youth were diverted out of the court system. They weren't further involved, which is the ultimate goal of some of these processes, to identify those lower risk youth that don't need to be heavily involved, which might have actually increased the recidivism. So getting them out early. And then we have a breakdown of these outcomes by race and ethnicity. This chart might look a little different depending on the program, but the gist of it is going to be the same, where you're looking at if they were successfully or unsuccessfully discharged. We also, on some of the plots, have an other category, so that means that the youth wasn't necessarily they weren't unsuccessful. They were discharged for some other reason out of the control of the program or the youth. Maybe they moved away. And so we do have that comparison on a few of the program reports. But in this case, it was just comparing whether they were successfully discharged versus unsuccessfully discharged. And then looking at that change by race and ethnicity. So this last section is the future system involvement, which Dr. Hobbs explained earlier, is consistent across all of the programs and program types that we evaluated. This year, a little different than last year, we do look at the separate types of system involvement, the status violation, law violation, probation, and detention for the youth enrolled or participating in the program. But this year we've also added a aggregated future system involvement note. And that's that italicized line under each of the categories. So from this example, 28 or 14% of the 200 youth who participated in the program became system involved after leaving the program. And so this was something we took from last year. We got a lot of feedback of it was difficult to tell when the numbers across the different types of FSI were indicating the same youth, that maybe they got a law violation and then also became probation involved, or if they were unique youth. So this italicized part shows you your individual youth who became system involved after leaving the program. And then we have comparisons of those that were successfully discharged compared to those who were unsuccessfully or other discharged for other reasons. In some programs, I don't believe either of our assessment programs fit this bill, but in some programs with enough cases, we did distinguish out the did not participate group as well, separated from unsuccessful or other. But if the cases were fewer than 10 for either unsuccessful, other, or did not participate, those were all lumped together in this unsuccessful other category, just so that we could have a two-group comparison for our statistical test to see whether those who were successfully discharged from the program were significantly different from all other youth in their system involvement. And so you'll see the footnotes at the bottom of the page explain the results of these statistical tests. So specifically, a chi-square test was computed to see whether the just rates of system involvement differed between successfully discharged or unsuccessfully or other discharged youth. In this example, the chi-square test did find a significant difference in successfully and unsuccessfully discharged youth system involvement. And so that would be a positive indicator that successful youth were less likely to become system involved after leaving the program. And then our last part here is looking at days to system involvement. So for those youth who left the program and did become system involved, we're looking at the average days that it took them to become system involved from that discharge and comparing that between the successful and unsuccessful or other youth. And so we've got what's called a survival curve displayed here, and the percentages are showing the amount of youth that did not become system involved following discharge, and it's by days. So as the days progress, we see those lines decline, meaning that more youth were becoming system involved. And then those final kind of plus sign symbols at the end of the graph is the ultimate percentage of youth in those categories that became system involved. So in this example, the successful looks to be about 80 something percent did not have system involvement. And if that matches the boxes we have above, that would mean that about 13% did become system involved for the successful group. And then we also ran an independent samples t-test on that to see whether the days or the time to system involvement differed between the successful and unsuccessful group. In this example, the significance was not met. And so it indicated that while there was a difference, 226 days to FSI for successful, 231 days for unsuccessful, that was not significant, which is positive in this case, actually, because unsuccessful and other discharged youth on average actually took longer to become system involved, and we were looking for successful youth to actually remain not system involved for longer. And so we wouldn't want this to be a significant test because that would actually indicate that successful youth were becoming system involved quicker. All right, moving on, then we have our actual evaluation and assessment. So we covered a lot of the demographics and processes earlier in the report. And while we wanted to report that data that you all have entered, those are not included in the evaluations this year. The determination of effectiveness is solely based on outcomes, program outcomes, as well as impacts. So long-term impacts such as future system involvement. And so we looked at 3 outcomes: the assessment outcomes of how many of the youth were diverted from further court involvement within their case, And then more long-term outcomes of system involvement compared between successful and unsuccessful cases, or successful and not successfully discharged cases. And then overall system involvement of whether there was high, moderate, or low system involvement after the youth left the program. You can go to the next. So that's what you'll find on this fourth page is the evaluation matrix. So looking at the outcomes for each of those categories, as you can see here, we have one row that's grayed out. That usually indicates that the evaluation couldn't be assessed. It's not a negative. In fact, you'll see at the very bottom, the overall rating is based on a percentage of total possible points. And when a category is grayed out like this, that then reduces the total possible points to the two categories that we did evaluate. So while the total is usually 15 possible points for assessment programs, in this instance, it would be just 10 possible points. And looking at the total percentage for that program out of 10 instead of 15. And that brings, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's important when we have a state with rural programs. We don't want programs that have small numbers to somehow be rated lower, right?
Mhm.
So it's a systematic approach to not doing that.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And then that brings us to the end of that page, which has a kind of rating scale to visualize the total points and outcome. There we go. And so you'll see that the quick description of how many points the program received from the evaluation, again, only based on these three outcomes, so there may be other outcomes or processes that are important to the program. And so there is that caveat of this is the evaluation based on these outcomes determined by us and the in concordance with the Crime Commission. And so then we have the sliding scale to show where the program rating fell in terms of the no or limited effect, promising, and effective. And then on the last page, we've just summarized this evaluation. So everything, all the visuals that we walked through, we've kind of reiterated what those were telling us based on the data. Focus mostly on those outcomes, but we do narrate some of the descriptives and program referrals as well. And then we describe in greater detail those statistical tests that we ran to explain why or why not we determined that there was significant difference in the groups or that it was a positive or negative impact. Finally, we end with the recommendations based on those evaluation categories of this area's area to focus on. This is an area that's doing well, maybe boost that, and so forth.
Oops, couldn't find my unmute. So if you have other programs, and many of you have multiple programs, this is the list of the upcoming dates. We do have a couple of times that have not been slotted yet for April. But keep these, you should have already received an email about this. So you will get individualized reports for these programs as well. And before we get into individual reports, are there any questions overall about a statistic that was used or a graph that you're looking at? So any questions at all, just generally about the reports this year? Okay, and I'll slowly start. While if you want to go into like an individual room and we can pull up your report, an individual Zoom room, if you don't mind, maybe raise your hand or unmute and let Faith know. While we're meeting, if you're not, I mean, we're a small group, so we may all be in a meeting room, but if you can take the survey, Faith will be putting that in the chat shortly. If she hasn't, I can't see my chat box. So if you haven't taken that, please do, because we definitely use results. We'd like to get your feedback. You can be as straightforward as you want to be, but it helps us make revisions to reports. So I think if you could take a few minutes and do that survey, it'd be fabulous. And then Faith, if you want to move us, does everybody Sarah and Leslie and Laura, do you all want to have a one-to-one meeting?
I don't need one. Thank you, though.
Okay. Sarah or Laura?
I think I'm okay. I just got the report. Sorry, I didn't reach out earlier. But if I do, I'll just email you guys. But I think I'm okay right now.
Okay, if you're totally
I
sure,
think
'cause-
I'm okay too.
okay. Okay, we'll make sure because sometimes this time of year we get really bogged down, and with Michaela moving on, I'm a little bit worried about us keeping up with emails. So, if you're absolutely sure you don't want to take a look now, I'm just worried you'll email us a question and just keep emailing us if we don't respond right away because we're a little bit, we've got about 200 reports rolling out over the next couple of weeks. So, or if you have another program coming up, that could be an opportunity too in a one-to-one to ask some of your questions.
Okay, yeah, I have several coming up, so I can do that too.
Okay. One thing I'll point out is last year's reports were a little bit more descriptive, and this year you get a little bit more statistical analysis if you had enough cases. And so hopefully that will be even more meaningful for your program. It doesn't always tell you why something's happening, but it can tell you kind of where to focus your efforts. And knowing that there's statistical significance puts more weight behind a finding. So, for example, let's say your program, like unsuccessful youth had, let's say successful youth had higher recidivism and it was statistically significant. That'd be really important to look at because it doesn't tell us exactly why, but it shows that kids who are doing the program have worse outcomes. So we want to really dig in. So any questions you have, just make sure, like, just start listing them out, Sarah, and then when we do meet, we can go through them. So,
Okay, sounds good.
all right. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, then you're free to sign off, and we'll see you at an upcoming webinar, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining. Real quick with you guys.